Okay, welcome Talk Poverty people, and thanks for joining us for our third Talk Poverty Live, where we discuss poverty in America and what we can do to dramatically reduce it. I'm Greg Kaufman, editor of TalkPoverty.org and a senior fellow here at the Center for American Progress. We've got a terrific show for you today. Our topic, TANF turns 18. Happy birthday to you, TANF, or hurry up on your demise. Before I introduce our great panel, a panel that includes you all, our viewers, because we count on your good questions and comments, which you can tweet to us at TalkPoverty using the hashtag TalkPovertyLive, or post to our Facebook page, TalkPoverty.org, using the same hashtag. But before we jump into it, I want to give a quick shout out. Every month, TalkPoverty.org chooses a hero of the month who is helping to lead the fight against poverty. This month, we've selected someone who's working not only to save the gains we've made, but to go on offense, to push the ideas that we know need to be pushed, and to be aggressive. That's Philadelphia Witness to Hunger member Tiana Gaines Turner, a friend of mine, a friend of many of yours who are watching. On July 9th, Tiana testified at Representative Paul Ryan's latest hearing assessing the war on poverty. She was invited by the Democratic minority, and she was the only one out of 17 witnesses who actually lives in poverty who was invited to talk about how the anti-poverty programs are working. Tiana was poised, she was smart, she was gracious, and she was tough. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for all the members of the committee. She was told that her ticket out of poverty is a job, even though she said repeatedly that both she and her husband have long worked. She was told that she was wrong to consider herself an independent person because the poverty wages that she and her husband earn result in her family needing food stamps. Through it all, Tiana was unflappable. She told the committee that what she and her neighbors need are things like a minimum wage that isn't a poverty wage, affordable child care so that when they're at work they don't have to worry that their kids are in a precarious situation, paid sick and family leave so they don't have to choose between a paycheck and taking care of a sick child, as Tiana was forced to repeatedly, and her family ended up homeless because of it. So Tiana, because of the way that you represented yourself, your family, the way you represented millions of Americans who don't usually get a day in Congress to testify, and really the way you represented all of us, you're our hero of the month, and we thank you. Okay, so we're going to turn to our discussion, which again is about TANF. 18 years ago this month, the Gingrich-led Congress passed legislation creating TANF, and President Bill Clinton signed it into law. We now have more than enough evidence to know how has it worked. Has it worked to reduce poverty? Could it be strengthened? Does it need to be scrapped? And how does the debate surrounding TANF reflect other conversations we're having about poverty in America today? I'm thrilled to introduce our panel. First, one of the only political leaders in either party who's really willing to speak openly about TANF, Congresswoman Gwen Moore of Wisconsin. She's represented the 4th Congressional District since 2005. She's a member of the House Budget Committee and the House Committee on Financial Services. And prior to her election, she received TANF assistance. Welcome, Congressman, and thank you so much for joining us.
It's absolutely delightful to be here.
Thank you. Next is my friend Emily Edwards. She's also a member of Witnesses to Hunger in Philadelphia. She's a part-time home health aide, and she's a current TANF participant, as well as a mother of a 6-year-old boy. I've watched Emily in action lobbying Congress, and I can tell you she's someone you want on your side. Welcome, Emily, and thank you also for joining us.
Thank you.
Finally, she's the Vice President for Family Income Support Policy at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, where she oversees the center's work analyzing poverty trends and assessing the nation's income support programs. She's also my friend. She happens to have one of the greatest names you're ever going to hear, La Donna Pavetti. For some reason, people call you Donna. La Donna Pavetti translates to the Lady Pavetti, which I think is a great name that we need out there in this anti-poverty fight. But welcome, La Donna.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm actually going to start with you because I think even people, those of us who are engaged in the fight of poverty, fight against poverty, a lot of us don't even really know what TANF is. So can you help our viewers? What is it?
Okay, sure. First of all, TANF stands for Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. I mean, that's its official name. And what it is it's a block grant of about $16.5 billion. And that money goes out to the states, and each state gets an allotment, which has been fixed since 1996 when it was first created. And that means its value has been eroded by about a third. States have a lot of flexibility in how they use the money, but there are also federal requirements around work and time limits for families that receive cash assistance. And it's a program that replaced the former Aid to Families with Dependent Children program, which was a program that primarily provided cash grants to families with children to meet their basic needs. So I think that's hopefully that's enough of an overview to get us started.
I think that is a good overview, and we'll get into some of more details, obviously, as we go along. Congressman, you've worked not only to improve TANF through the RISE Act, which we're going to talk about, but you, as I mentioned, you actually experienced the TANF program prior to serving in Congress. Can you tell us about your experience?
Well, actually, I was a beneficiary of Aid to Families with Dependent Children, the predecessor program to TANF. And the difference, of course, between AFDC and TANF is that AFDC was an entitlement program. It was a program that really recognized the cyclical nature of our economy, and that for whatever reason, if a woman was unable to receive child support, didn't have a job, was not married, that those children should be held harmless. And that they should be provided with the basic necessities, unlike TANF, which punishes the children upon the unemployment or incapacity of the parent to provide.
That's right. Okay, that's helpful, yeah, because the AFDC program, which TANF replaced, was very accessible for families that were struggling. Now, Emily, you're participating currently in the TANF program, is that right?
Yes, I am.
And I think, is it true that it can be a little bit harder to access, to receive the TANF assistance currently?
As it stands right now, yes, it really is. You basically have to have nothing to get a little of something, and I mean a little. So they gave me a runaround for a good minute after I had lost my job, and I had actually nothing, but they wanted me to go all the way around the board, check and see if I can get unemployment, see if I can actually obtain another job. And in order to get to be qualified for TANF, you have to do a program, which if you have a sick child or a child that is not in daycare, you really don't qualify for that, because if you miss any days, then you don't get your TANF. You don't qualify for TANF, you don't get the cash, and then along with the TANF, you have to make sure that you can get car fare to get back and forth to the program. If they don't put the car fare on, you can't get to the program. If you don't get to the program, you don't have no cash. It's a mess.
Sounds like a mess. And Donna, Emily's describing how hard it is in Philadelphia and in Pennsylvania, and really the TANF block grant, which, as you mentioned, gave so much power to the states, it really changes state by state how much people can access the program. Can you talk a little bit about how, say, AFDC was able to reach families compared to how TANF is able to assist families now?
Sure. So there are a number of sort of really critical differences. One is that TANF provides basic assistance to far fewer families than AFDC did, and also, as Congresswoman Moore mentioned at the beginning, that AFDC was, really cyclical in nature, that it would go up and down, and we haven't seen that in TANF. So just to give you a couple of statistics about how well it has performed and how that compares, in 1996, which was when TANF was created, so AFDC was really the law of the land at that time, AFDC provided assistance to 68 families for every 100 in poverty, so a little over 2/3. And now TANF serves about 25 families for every 100 in poverty. And in some states, that ratio is as low as 4, meaning that in some states that TANF provides cash assistance to just 4 families for every 100 in poverty. So that is very, very few families. So I think that gives us some sense of access and how much of a role it plays in terms of reducing poverty. The other, I think, a particularly striking figure is how much less of an effective TANF has been at lifting children out of deep poverty, which we defined as half the poverty line, and that's just under $10,000 for a family of 3. So in 1995, AFDC lifted 2.2 million children out of deep poverty, but in 2010, TANF lifted only 629,000 children out of poverty. So a lot fewer families. The benefits vary by state. Access varies by state, so you have a lot of variation, and that is a lot of sort of, with the flexibility, states were given a lot of, room in how they could use that. States have always had a lot of variation in what level of benefits they provide to people, and that variation has continued.
And just to clarify, when people are able to access TANF, and you've described how hard it is, we're not talking about a lot of money on average, right?
No, the median state, it's the monthly benefit is $428 a month for a family of 3. So there are some states that are far below that and some states that are a little bit above that. But in general, it is very limited benefits in terms of cash assistance to meet people's basic needs.
Wow. Congresswoman, I want to ask you, Donna's just described what I would characterize as a pretty weak performance by TANF. And yet, your fellow Wisconsin delegate member, Congressman Paul Ryan, and other conservatives, and not just conservatives, have called it a, quote, model welfare reform. And many Democrats avoid talking about TANF altogether. What do you attribute that to? What do you make of that? Just this characterization and lack of willingness to discuss TANF by others?
Well, I can tell you that TANF was touted as the bipartisan agreement that came out of the Clinton administration. And so there are still very many Democrats who brag about the bipartisan nature of TANF. And certainly there's not a Republican around who doesn't claim that TANF was a rounding success. Well, it has been successful, as LaDonna pointed out, in absolutely reducing the rolls, but that doesn't mean that it's taking people out of poverty. Right. I think to the extent that Democrats may be unwilling to talk about TANF at this point is because it's a conundrum for them. On one hand, they don't want to be seen as supporting a welfare state, as it were, but on the other hand, they do know that it has not succeeded. The program deliberately did not keep track of what we call levers, so that they could make these blanket, unsubstantiated narratives about it being successful. During the recession, for example, the only income people had really was food stamps. TANF did not respond to the poor in the last recession.
Right. Congressman, actually, I remember you have a pretty good story about that. You related in a committee hearing, budget committee hearing last year, about trying to get Wisconsin to track the number of people who were able to get off of the TANF program and out of poverty, and they wanted nothing to do with it. Am I remembering that correctly?
They wanted nothing to do with it. As a matter of fact, they said that people didn't want them in their business. Can you imagine that? The state not wanting to be in that business. No, they wanted to be able to make this blanket statement about the success of it, and to only report the numbers of people who left the rolls. Right. And there were many incentives built into the program here in Wisconsin to get people off welfare. One was, absolutely denying benefits to people who would be eligible as they came, and discouraging them from applying with the whole work first notion, go look for a job before you can even apply. And for creating incentives, profit incentives for the people who delivered the services. So if it were the Goodwill or the YMCA or agencies that provided services in the Hispanic or the African American community, they could keep the residual dollars, they could keep the bonus money from all the services that they denied clients. So they built in an incentive not to serve people.
That's pretty disturbing. Emily, based on the experiences you've had, if you had an opportunity to talk directly to Congress, to people who don't necessarily understand what's going on as well as the Congresswoman does, what would you tell them about TANF, what you've experienced, what your neighbors have experienced, what your witness brothers and sisters have experienced? I know it's mostly sisters, but there's a Baltimore witness who reminds me that there's brother witnesses too.
Yes.
What would you say to Congress?
If you don't mind, I want to piggyback off of what the Congresswoman says.
Please do.
I agree. Take it in, do a survey, go in, talk to the people, and see how many actually made it off of this TANF program with success. Going to work, being able to just completely do away with the TANF and the welfare situation and be able to deal on their own. I say let's do a vote. I say let's go to Congress as a group of people and say, hey, listen, we want you to vote on us now. You want us to vote on you. Let's vote on us. Let's turn this picture around real quick and see how many of us is really getting somewhere or having to have to come back constantly. I see my same sisters and brothers coming back and forth to the welfare office, getting back on the same program. Why? Because we don't have a chance to go out there and actually get an actual job that's going to keep us off that program, number one. Number two, they have a new system in Philadelphia where it's they want you to come in, do a welfare to work program, and I guess our TANF is what's paying us. No, it's not working. It's not working at all, because in a lot of cases, like she said, they're getting incentive for not hiring us. At the end of this 6-month period of us working for y'all, you giving us job skills. Half of us already have this job skill. Like I had to tell a lot of people, I've been behind the desk and in front of the desk. I know this job skill already. I don't want to keep coming back and doing the same thing over and over and over again. Put us back in school. Send us back to school again. Send us where we can actually make it somewhere instead of keep going over the same process over and over and over again. It's a repetitive process that's not working. And I wish that if I was able to talk to Congress right now, I would say it's not working. It's not working. Try something else, because what do I have to tell my son to look forward to? Mommy has to go to work today. Once I finish work on Friday, my son is like, well, Mom, can we go here? Can we go there? How can I take him there? I don't make that much. Right. Why? Because the program that they want us to do is not successful at all.
And I know, and I've talked to other witnesses too, who've even been forced out of college just shy of their degree to join a career readiness program, for-profit job training program, and that a lot of those programs don't lead to jobs that pay family-sustaining wages. So I hear you loud and clear, and that is a really important message. Donna, I want to ask you, as somebody who's really tracked TANF since its inception, along the same lines as what I just asked Emily. I mean, if you were, well, you have testified before Congress, but many times, but give our viewers a sense of maybe 3 things that you think are just smacking us in the face that need to be changed about this program.
One of the first things that I would do is to constrain the spending. So what happened in TANF with the flexibility is that, as Congresswoman Moore said, when states, when the caseloads went down, even if it wasn't the agencies able to keep that money, states could take that money and use it for lots of other things. So states, the TANF money is really all through states' budgets. So I think if you constrain the funding so that it could only be used to support and reduce poverty, so to provide basic assistance and to help families to either gain the skills or to support them while they're in work, we would have a very different program. So I would really sort of make some changes around spending and particularly constraining that. The second thing I would do is, again, what people have talked about, is holding states accountable for the outcomes that they achieve and not just for process. So getting recipients employed, do we get them out of poverty, do we help kids have a better life? Those are the things that TANF is touted as a success, but we don't have evidence that TANF has done that, and in some cases we have evidence that it has not done that. So I think really sort of setting a very different accountability structure is another thing that I would do. And the third thing I would do is to really completely redo the work requirements. The work requirements act as constraints, not as opportunity builders. And I think what we need to do there is to really recognize that there is this very diverse group of people who come to the TANF roles for help, and that what we want is to really think about how can we create alternative pathways to work that really take people from where they are and help to move them forward. So those with significant barriers get the help they need there. Those who are already working but want better jobs or really are aspiring to that get the access to education and training so that they can move into better jobs. So those are the three things that I would sort of put in the top of my list for changes.
Thank you, and we are going to talk more about the work requirement that you brought up. Congresswoman, you are actually one of the first stories I covered, one of the first things I covered as a reporter on the Poverty Beat was your RISE Act. You've actually tried to overhaul TANF in some of the ways that have just been discussed. Not enough people know about the RISE Act. Can you tell us a little bit about what you tried to do with that?
Well, I think one of the most important elements of the RISE Act are things that LaDonna and Emily have already referred to. For one thing, my concern about the TANF program and its work first component is that it doesn't provide education and training or on a very limited basis. And I'm concerned that this is a program, you know, because you can hear everybody say, well, education is the key to job success in the future. But for women who would be customers or clients of the TANF program. So we're creating a permanent underclass in our country comprised primarily of women, the so-called feminization of poverty, and securing a place for women as an underclass on a permanent basis by not allowing education and training. So the RISE Act would do that. The RISE Act would, again, as LaDonna pointed out, would restrict the use of funding for something, for programs that would actually help people rise out of poverty. For example, it would require that child care be provided if if a person has to go to work or to go to school. That child care would not be just based on the availability of funding. You would have to provide child care with the RISE Act. The RISE Act really focused on keeping those data and tracking people. Also, the time limits that are in the TANF program. It would stop the clock when there were clearly recessionary conditions in places like Philadelphia. You can't have the clock ticking and deny a recipient benefits if, in fact, Philadelphia or some other city is embroiled in a recessionary period or very high unemployment. So those are three. I could name I could go line by line, but those are three huge items that would reform this deformed program.
I mean, well put. I mean, those are important reforms. And Emily, I would ask you, I mean, just listening to some of that, opportunities for education, addressing the time limit issue, access to child care when you're at work. I mean, I think these are things that people who've experienced poverty, this really resonates with them. Am I right there?
Yes, you are, very much so. We all have we definitely have the same issues. If we are in a program for welfare and we have to get on a TANF program, 9 times out of 10, we definitely have a problem with childcare. We don't have nobody that's going to say, okay, listen, we're going to take your children for a little bit so you can go ahead, go find a job, look for a job, go on job search. No, we need that to make sure that is secure in our environment at all times. Food stamps, yes. In order to even get TANF, you got to be on food stamps. You have to be able to put those in together. But what's so funny about the food stamps and the child care, and most importantly, which I am struggling with right now, is housing. It's really amazing to me how I can walk into a shelter and I see every young lady that's in the shelter right now is on having a problem with every last one of these systems. And it's the food stamps, the housing, and the child care that goes hand in hand with each other. And there are women that's in the shelter that they know that they're in the shelter and they go through this one big thing. If you miss an appointment or you don't get the letter or you anything can happen. Being as though we are going from one situation to another, I feel as though there's no balance there, no security at all in that situation. Whereas though I'm in the shelter system, I need to find a job, I need to make sure I have child care, and I need to make sure I can eat all in one. There's a lot of us going through that same process where so if you miss that letter, guess what? You're getting them all cut off, and now you're sitting in the shelter system, which makes no sense to me. You guys sit in the shelter system and you have none of that, but they're telling you to go and do that. I think nobody's playing hand in hand. Nobody's together with the whole situation. Interestingly enough, with TANF, if you go into the program, I have no clue on why I go into a program. You want me to do a back to work program, but the back to work program is not in order with the TANF program. The TANF program is not sure what's going on at the welfare office, and you're all in the same building. I'm lost. I need everybody to be put together in one system. There's no way in the world that I live in a shelter. I get TANF. I need my food stamps, and I go to a back-to-work program. But nobody can look into each system and pull anything up. You have to go to each office separately. God forbid you miss an appointment, you don't get nothing.
Yeah, and I know there are a lot of people working on, for example, One Stop, where you can integrate those kinds of services, so you're not doing a million different forms and dealing with lots of different people. And I'm going to ask you guys some more questions in a second, but I want to remind our Talk Poverty people, don't forget to tweet your questions and your comments to @TalkPoverty, #TalkPovertyLive. You can also post your questions and comments to our TalkPoverty.org Facebook page using the same hashtag, which I never knew. You use hashtags with Facebook too. You learn stuff about this new world every day. Donna, let's go into the politics a little bit of all of this, which are challenging to say the least. I'm thinking of the example when Health and Human Services indicated that it would allow waivers for certain aspects of TANF policy. There were claims that this would, quote, gut the work requirements. You talked a little bit about your views on the work requirements, but can you talk about them in sort of comparison to where conservatives are coming from with work requirements?
Sure. I believe that a focus on work is important. I think that we are at a point where work is the only way people are going to move out of poverty. But I don't think that it should come at the expense of providing a safety net for families, and I think that's what we've done. We have this really strong, very harsh focus on work that really has reduced the ability of TANF to provide a safety net for families. So that's one thing I think where there really is a difference. It isn't work or a safety net. I think what you need to do is be thinking about those together. The second is that I think that part of to be able to achieve those together, what you need is to really be able to, again, and I said this before, is to recognize that people are at very different places and to be able to really come up with alternative pathways for people to get started and for people to move people forward in the best way possible. So when I think about what would be the measure of a successful work program, is that people end up at a better place than they started. So if somebody has a mental health issue, they have that mental health issue under control so that they can succeed better at work. If they are in a low-wage job, they come out with a better job or more income to be able to meet their family needs. So what you want is really, I think, a frame that is really about opportunity and about using the time people are on TANF to help them move forward. And I think that that's very different from the conservative frame, which is much more about a focus on obligation and have people, requiring people to do something in exchange for getting their benefits. So the focus is very much on, if you're going to get a benefit, you need to do something in exchange for it, and it doesn't matter whether or not you lead into a better place. So it doesn't matter. What matters is that we get people into an unpaid work slot and that they're doing something 20, 30, 40 hours a week, but it doesn't matter. The measure isn't, does that lead to a better job down the road? Does it lead to employment at all? So that's a very, very different frame. I think there is also a different frame of causes. In sort of, there's much more conversation on the conservative side about the safety net constraining work, whereas I think that that's not what the evidence shows. The evidence shows that people want to work, that what is hard is all the things that Emily talked about, that if you don't have childcare, if you don't have housing, if you can't get to work, those are sort of basic supports. So I think there is this very different and fundamental difference in the way that people think about work and the role that it should play in public benefit programs, and that's where I think some of the difficulty came in with the waivers.
Right, right. And Congresswoman, how do you think, would these conversations be very different if low-income people were voting in far greater numbers than currently? Would the way some conservatives tend to talk about work or lack of work ethic, or how the system should be constructed, would even your RISE Act get more attention if the voting demographics changed in this way?
I tell you that politics and politicians would quake in their boots if the millions, tens of millions of people who are now poor would take their grievances to the voting booth. I agree with LaDonna. People do want to work. They do not want to be on welfare. But if these welfare programs could deliver on the promise of helping lift you out of poverty, I mean, people would have stormed the White House a generation ago and demanded it. But it doesn't. What these programs do is really, it serves the corporate elite. It provides workers at very low wage levels to say, you must go to work. A lot of times in the retail food industry, these people complained that we can't compete with a system that provides daycare and Medicaid and food stamps. So what you really have to do is really snatch the safety net from a bunch of people so that you can force them into the low-wage workforce. And that is what these programs tend to do. They subsidize low-wage work by taking away the safety net. If we really, truly wanted to help lift people out of poverty, we would be trying to connect them with labor training, with education and training for the upcoming jobs that we see on the horizon, the new energy economy, the greater demand for health care. We'd be trying to get more CNAs or healthcare workers. And there are many women who are capable of this kind of work, capable of this training, but the educational opportunity under TANF is so willing. Here we are having this Google Hangout on Women's Equality Day, talking about a program that is deliberately designed to make women unequal in the economy.
Right. I mean, you have this millions of women who are virtually an unpaid workforce available through this program. Am I characterizing that fairly?
Yeah.
Oh, I couldn't hear you. But
Yes, I think it's true. I think that the women are primarily the clients under TANF, but the program is designed to make them unequal in our economy.
Right.
You know, we're ready for jobs and job training and opportunities. We wish that the hundreds of millions of dollars that are spent on job training would be spent in this program. And by all means, just like LaDonna said, we shouldn't have to worry about our kids being able to eat if the economy is failing us. There should definitely be a safety net.
You know, another thing I think that is important is that when welfare reform was passed, there were two sort of premises. One was that work first was the way to go, so that there was a belief that was really sort of pervasive at that time, that if you got people into any job, that what would happen was that they would eventually move into better jobs, and you would see this progression. And we know that that didn't happen, so that people who moved into low-wage jobs tended to stay in low-wage jobs. So we have 18 years of evidence that that's a flawed view. We also have a different labor market now than we had then. Welfare reform was started when the economy was booming. And so there were jobs that people could get. And so the idea that situation hasn't changed, I think is just, that sort of, it's always striking to me that we assume we can achieve whatever we achieved in 1996 when we had a booming labor market in a completely different labor market where there are fewer jobs, much higher unemployment rate, and a lot greater skill demands. So it feels to me that we have all this activity going on about really focusing on education, doing a lot on career pathways, a lot on sectoral employment, and we're really leaving people who are in public benefits out of those opportunities. And I think that's one of the things we have to change, that we should not have one system of education and training for everybody but people who are on public benefits. What we should be doing is really trying to make the public benefit system of work a part of that system, and to make sure that people who receive public benefits have access to the opportunities outside of it. And that's not what that system is right now.
And here's the upshot of that. I agree with everything that LaDonna just said. And I just want to focus that it discriminates against people who are on TANF who are primarily women. So it is very gender-based. But to the extent that we have seen families, and we look only at Maria Shriver's latest report to see that families, that the majority of families are very, very dependent on women's income to keep the family out of poverty, and sometimes it's the only income in a family. And to the extent that that's true, we're leaving not just women behind, but their whole families behind. Even when there are men in the families, denying women economic mobility is hurting whole families. So when we start talking about 45 million people in poverty, a lot of it has to do with our poverty policy.
Well, we're going to get to questions from our viewers in a second, because we have a bunch actually, but I want to just quickly piggyback something you both have just discussed, which is how much the economy has changed since TANF was passed. And I'll just throw this out to all of you. So Congressman Ryan just released his new plan, his new proposal, and really the center of it is what I see as a TANF-like block grant that would combine 11 programs, including child care, housing, food stamps, TANF, I don't know what else. Anyway, is there anything new here that I'm missing? And actually, you know what? I'm going to read this quote from something LaDonna recently wrote in her most recent post. The evidence from TANF suggests that applying TANF-like reforms to other safety net programs would likely cause more families to join the ranks of the deeply poor and cause some who are already deeply poor to become even poorer. So am I missing anything about the latest proposal to come out, or is it more of the same and it's very troubling?
I think it is troubling, and I think it is more of the same. So I think that if I feel like we have sort of two different things going on, is that Congressman Ryan and other people sort of tout welfare as a success and as a model for other programs. But the reality is we have 18 years of data, and we have 4 years from 1996 to 2000 when employment went up for never married mothers with a high school degree or less, and we have 14 years when it either went down or stayed steady. So if you look at that whole record as the record on which any sort of proposal going forward should be based, then I think there's a very different story. And I think that what's really troubling is that when we've lost TANF as a safety net, food stamps and housing really are the only programs that are available, that are mainly available to help people meet their basic needs. And if those are gone, then we really will have virtually no safety net. And the people that really get harmed are kids. And we know that those programs help to move people out of poverty, and we know that they not only have short-term impact moving people out of poverty, but they also have long-term impacts on where kids end up in life. And so I think that it really is not, there isn't evidence to suggest that going in that direction will make things better, and I think there's lots of evidence that it would make things worse.
Yeah.
So I serve on the budget committee with Paul Ryan, and you know, at first blush, it might sound attractive, even to people like Emily, when he says that we're going to streamline all the programs and give the states more flexibility so that they can meet people's child care needs and health care needs and blah blah blah. But when you hear block grant, just think chopping block, because it does two things. It provides some certain amount of money, despite what the need is, despite what people's eligibility is. And when that money runs out, it just runs out. And secondly, it cuts the entitlement. Right now, if you're entitled to food stamps, you get them. In a situation where it's a block grant, once that allocation for food stamps has dried up, it doesn't matter how hungry you are, how eligible you are. You could have 12 kids, and you still wouldn't get a food stamp. And just since I threw that little stereotype out that welfare recipients have 12 kids, I just want to point out, you know, you look at places like Mississippi, which has the lowest, one of the lowest TANF allocations per person, and you find families with a larger family. So this notion that people just have babies so they can get on welfare really doesn't hold out either.
Right. Okay, I'm going to turn to some of our viewers' questions real quickly. Okay, from @J Goldblum. Please ask who else in Congress supported the RISE Act, Congresswoman. Who else supported it?
Oh, well, you know, very clearly, very many Democrats. I'm very proud of the fact that Barbara Lee from Oakland, California, who herself was once on welfare, is one of the very strident supporters of TANF. Mr. McDermott, Representative McDermott from the state of Washington, who is on the Ways and Means Committee and was most recently the chair of the Income Subcommittee on the Ways and Means Committee, supports the RISE Act and made sure I had an opportunity to testify before the Ways and Means Committee that has jurisdiction over this program. Nancy Pelosi supports the RISE Act. And of course, because we're in the minority, it's very, very difficult to introduce this bill and to have it pass out of our House.
Right, that makes sense. Emily, there's a question for you from @CTEGirl892. Can you talk about some of the activism you're involved in and what allies can do? That's for Emily.
Okay. Well, I'm a part of Witnesses to Hunger. Which pretty much we represent, you know, the the women that are going through poverty right now, and to hear their voices and their pictures on what's going on, not only in Philadelphia but abroad and a couple of other states too. So, just to answer that, I believe that everybody can play a part. Everybody, by just going out there and writing a letter to the president or to the Congress or just anything. Anything goes. Come have a conversation with us. See where we stand as people, because I can promise you one thing. Just because we are going through certain stuff, we might be not have that much food in our houses, to not even having a place to live. We are all educated. We are going to school. We are all trying to make better lives for our children. We're not out there just trying to have a handout. At the end of the day, we want to put a part in this whole situation, and we want to make it better for the next generation that's coming on behind us. So,
Emily, oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Let's go to it.
No, you just made me think of something, and I'm going to ask more questions, but I just have to ask this one because of what you just said about what you and your witness sisters are like. And so, Congressman, I got to piggyback off that. And, since so much of this debate and poverty conversation is dominated by, like, myths and stereotypes about what people are like who live in poverty, don't we really need more public venues, more hearings, more anything where people like Emily can tell their real story, and we can overcome those myths and stereotypes? And if we need those kinds of opportunities, do you know of things that you and or your colleagues are doing to try to get those stories out there before the American people?
Well, the person who raised the question to Emily really touched on a very, very important concept, and that is that we have allies. One of the things that the TANF program has done is this really pitted very low-income people against other poor people, against working poor. Because of income inequality and the fact that there hasn't been a rise in wages commensurate with people's needs in the economy, people have gotten to resent people who get food stamps. Oh, did you see her with those popsicles in her cart and she's spending food stamps on them? It's because the reality is that we need an increase in wages. We need more income inequality. We need to have a larger conversation about the economic ruin that this country is coming to by keeping people as poor as they are and allowing there to be income gaps 900 times what a minimum wage worker makes. And then people who are poor even being below that. There needs to be some allies among working class poor people and low income people.
Right.
Can I piggyback off that real quick?
Me too.
I also want to say that, definitely become an advocate. An advocate is very strongly needed in the neighborhoods, at your jobs. Be a voice for the ones that don't speak up to understand what's going on. Because to just piggyback off of everybody else's comment, yes, they do stereotype us a lot. They look at us. I get a lot of stare downs, questions, eyebrows raised, everything, every day. Oh, look at her eyelashes, but she's going to the store with food stamps, or she has an access card. It is not always don't judge a book by its cover. I can promise you that, because I'm going through something just like the next person is going through something. We are all human. We all go through something. And right now I'm at my point where I need help. We all need help. And definitely become an advocate, because I am an advocate within any state, city, neighborhood that I go in. I do research. I go about my friends and family, and even people that I don't know. If they need a question, they don't know where to go for a certain thing, I do go find that information out for them. Yes, some of us are a little shy to speak out and say, I might need help, but if you need it, you need it.
Yeah. I'm going to throw you guys another question from @Erica WILLI. Can anybody speak to how states can promote higher ed for TANF recipients?
I can. So the federal government basically has a list of requirements, and there are constraints about higher education, and they have to meet work participation rates. So there are lots of constraints, but there are ways for states to go around those, and so there are some states, and I can name two that have done it recently. Nebraska and Minnesota have both passed legislation that really will open up the doors and allow much greater access to education. So they basically have said, we're going to take responsibility and, sort of figure out whether or not it, causes us to have some problems with the work rate. We'll deal with that in other ways. So I think there is sort of increasing movement. There are other states, California among them, and Kentucky, that have always promoted access to higher education and continue to do that. So states can do it. It just requires being a little bit bold and recognizing that the TANF work participation does not have to completely define what they do, that there are other ways to meet those rates, and that they need to really sort of, again, be bold and do what is right for people to help them move forward.
And I bet you not a lot of people would have guessed that Nebraska would be one of those two states. So it just goes to show you just never know, right? Look, we're gonna have to end in a minute. I want to give you each a chance. Anything I haven't asked you about that you really just want to get out there. I'll start with you, Congresswoman. If anything I haven't asked you about that you want to talk about.
Well, I do think that we've talked about it, but we glossed over it a little bit. It's really important for poor people to vote. And I know it's very, very difficult. I know from experience that it's hard to think about long-term planning and voting when you're in a crisis from day to day. You're living from month to month. But as part of our organization, whether it's against gun violence or against poverty, I think that the thing that wealthy people and people who only care about corporations fear more than anything is an organized group of low-income people who are organized, and that they're not going to allow voter ID requirements or raining outside or anything else to stop them from going to the polls. We really could hold politicians accountable if we were to organize and say, yes, we vote.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And Emily, I want to first thank you for sharing your story with us today. It's not easy to do, especially, as you said, when you get people taking shots at you every day. But anything I haven't asked you about that you'd like to say before we close out here?
No, I actually had a question.
Okay.
Quick question. On the food stamps application, they have a sector where they ask if you need any assistance with anything to mark that box. Why do they have a section for housing when can't nobody tell me where I need to go, how to do it, or anything to that matter? They just basically say, oh, we don't deal with housing. So why is that still on the option list on the food stamps application? Can somebody answer that question?
Not me, unfortunately. Anybody?
I mean, there's a notion that there's such a thing as categorical eligibility, which we don't want people to destroy. One of the things in the last fight over food stamps, and I live in a heat and eat state, Wisconsin, where if you qualified for food stamps, you automatically qualified for the low-income energy assistance program, the LEAP program, and they ended that so that you wouldn't have to, separately seek energy assistance. So, to the extent to which we can, as you pointed out, combine these programs and make people categorically eligible. If you were eligible for under AFDC, if you were eligible for AFDC, you were also eligible for food stamps, you were also eligible for Medicaid. That was a streamlined approach that Paul Ryan is proposing, except he wants to streamline it with less money.
Right. Donna, was there anything you wanted to add to the conversation today?
You know, there's sort of two very quick points that I'd like to make. One is that I think it's really important when we think about the safety net and what's left of it, is that the people who benefit from that often are children and people who are disabled or people who are on hard times. And I think as a country, we need to maintain a commitment to really provide people help when they are struggling. And the other is that I think it is really important that we all recognize there is always room for change and to make things better, but we shouldn't, in the process of doing that, throw out what works. And we know that the safety net really does make a difference for families, and that it not only, as I said, makes a difference in the immediate term, it also makes a difference in the long term. So I think we have to do much more to really make sure people understand the positive impacts that the safety net has on people's lives, again, both in the short and the long term.
Well, thank you, LaDonna, and thank you, Congresswoman Moore, and thank you, Emily, for your time and your insights today. I hope we can talk again soon. I want to thank our viewers for joining us and for your questions and comments. I hope you will join us again next month for Talk Poverty Live. And until then, I hope you'll keep talking poverty and keep fighting poverty and keep the faith. So, thank you.
Welcome.